In this section, we're going to eliminate using addition. And that means if you have two things that are opposite signs but the same number, we can add, and that eliminates the letter. So if you look at this very first problem, we have -4 and 4. So if we were to add these two equations up, these would go to 0. But then when we add the next two letters, we get a -2y. And if we add 5 and -3, we get 2. We've now eliminated one of the letters, so we can solve for the letter y by solving. We get y by itself, so I divide by -2, so y would equal a -1. And once you have one letter, you can plug it back in to solve the other letter. So I'll plug 1 back in, so I have a -4x plus 3 times -1 equals -3. That's a -3, and I'm going to add it to both sides. So -4x equals 0, so x equals 0. So our 2 points are x equals 0. Our 2 points, 2 coordinates, 0, -1. Now if we look at the next problem, we want to look for things that are the same, but here's the trick. This is not in the correct order. So if I put it in the correct order, that means a -4y plus 3x equals 14. And I can do that to the commutative property. I have opposite signs, so they go to 0 if I add. And if I add 3 and 3, I get 6x. And if I add 14 and 22, I get 36. And then I can solve for x and get 6. Once again, I can plug that back in. So I have 4y plus 3 times 6 equals 22. And that gives me 4y, that's 18, and I subtract it from the other side. I get 4, divide, I get y equals 1. So my answer is 6, 1. The last problem has it inside, so we have the same thing inside. So those letters, if I add, would cancel, and so when I add, I get 7x equals 35, then x equals 5. And then I can plug it back into either of the equations. So I'll plug it back into the top equation, so 4 times 5 plus 6y equals 32, and that's 20, and if I minus that, that'll give me a 12 equals 6y, divided by 6, I get y equals 2, so my answer is 5, 2. So to do this problem, because the numbers are not opposite, they're the same, I'm going to make them opposite and still add. That's how we do it, which is called subtraction. So I'm going to add, but I'm going to make that a -7, a positive 2. Let me erase this circle so I can do this. But I'm going to make that a negative, this a positive, and this a positive. So now I'm doing exactly what we did before. I'm going to add. That goes to 0. And so 3 plus 2 is 5g. And 31 plus a -6 is 25. And so g equals 5. And then I substitute back in. So if I go up to 7f plus, and I'm going to substitute the 5 in for the g, equals -6. I have 7f plus 15 equals -6. I subtract 15 from both sides. I get 7f equals -21, so f equals a -3. And so I have my two answers, f equals -3 and g equals 5. So the same thing we look at this problem right here in the middle. They're the same. So I'm going to change the sign so I can do addition. So if I change the sign, and once again, I'm going to erase this blue. So if I change the sign, that's a negative, that's positive, that's negative. I'm now going to add. It gives me a 4a, that goes to 0, and I get 16. So a equals 4. And once I have one letter, I can solve for the other letter by just substituting back in. And that's 24 minus 3b equals 27. If I subtract 24, I get -3b equals 3, so b equals -1. So I have my two letters. In this particular problem, we need to write our equations, and there'll be two of them. So let's read what we have. We have -3 times one number, so -3 times one number, plus 5 times another number, so I'll use y, is -11. Then it says 3 times the first number, plus 7 times the other number, so I'm using y, equals a negative 1. By doing this, once again, I've created a problem where I have opposite signs. So if I add, I get 0 for this part, and I get 12y equals negative 12. And if I divide by 12, I get y equals negative 1. Now I substitute this back into either equation. So I'll just substitute back in the first one. Negative 3n plus 5 times negative 1 equals negative 11. Negative 5, and if I add it to the other side, this will be a negative 6. Divide by negative 3, n equals 2. So my answers are negative 1 and 2. This problem is another one of the problems where we're going to make our equation. So let's read the first part. The sum of two numbers is negative 10. So I'm just going to use a plus b equals negative 10. There's my first equation. The second equation is negative 3 times the first number. Well, if a is my first number, I'm going to take a negative 3 times it, minus the second number, and it equals 2. Once again, our two opposite numbers are inside, so they'll go to 0. So if I add, I would get a negative 2a equals negative 8, and a equals negative 4. If I plug back into the first equation, negative 4 plus b equals 10. I add 4 to both sides, I would get 14. So my two answers are b equals 14 and a equals a negative 4.